Hello, I'm back reviewing The 12 Kingdoms, The Fast Spread of the Sea. Now, this is the third book in the 12 Kingdoms series, and as far as I'm aware, it's also the one that takes place like the furthest back in time, because it takes place, it was like 480 years before the beginning of like book one, and it like tells the story of Anki and the king of An Suryu, and like this about this event that took place 20 years into the reign, where the acting governor of the Gan province, Atsuyu, ends up like basically starting this rebellion, apparently to help the people of the Gan province, but in reality it's all for a grab of power where he tries to take over the king of An's throne, basically, or like put himself higher than the king. And so like the book kind of like alternates between the what's going on in the Gan province, like specifically in like the capital of like the Gan province, in the palace there, and the An Royal Palace. And so like there are like a couple of different like point of views in this book. Like the main one is Anki, where like both him and Suryu are Taika, where Anki was basically swapped over into Japan as like centuries ago. His parents ended up having to abandon him in the woods because he was living during a time of war and his family didn't have enough food to feed everyone, and so they made the decision to like leave him behind, even though it clearly didn't want to. And he had to be being found like a couple of years later, I think, where he was 4 when he came back, and about the same time in An, where before Suryu there was the king they call the Owl King. I don't think he has a name because like all of the kings have like different titles. Like Suryu is called the Alpha King, and so the Owl King, he ended up becoming a tyrant and basically destroying An and like making it into like a wasteland basically. And I think it was afterwards another young boy, he was abandoned as well, and the two of them are, I think, like foils to each other. But the two of them end up meeting later on. After Anki chooses Suryu, they meet on like this beach. Well, the young boy, he forgot what his name was. He's been living with this demon they call like a sky dog, and they're kind of like taking care of each other. And he calls the sky dog like Big One. But Anki ends up giving the name of Koya, and like Anki doesn't tell him what his actual name is. He ends up telling him that his name is Rokuta, which was his name when he lived back in Japan. Like, he doesn't tell him he's like hearing or anything. And so Koya ends up calling Big One Rokuta so that he doesn't forget the name. So basically the two of them end up splitting apart, and then the story's kind of like diverged from there. Like, I think Anki is basically the same as he is when we've seen him. I mean, like, he doesn't appear too much in the books, but he kind of seems the same. Like, his relationship with Suryu, for the most part, the same. Like, in this book especially, he's like pretty hostile to the position of like king because of his whole backstory and how the Owl King became a tyrant and everything. Because like they talk about like everything that the Owl King did, and it was all pretty horrific, and nobody is sad that he's gone. Everyone was like super happy he's gone. And this whole thing morphed into Anki like a hatred of kings, like I said, where he views all of them as basically like evil and eventually turning on the people and destroying the kingdom and everything. Well, like even with Suryu, he doesn't seem to like him too much. Like he sort of likes him as a person. I don't think he has too much bad things about him, but he mostly, I think, hates him because he is the king. And like we do see like throughout the book, like there are flashbacks to when Anki was a little bit younger, like him living in Hosan, and when he first met Soryu, that he didn't want to be the Kirin anymore, that he didn't want to choose the king because of like everything that's happened, which I kind of find understandable in a bit, because like he was a child back in Japan when he saw all of these horrible things happening, and he came back only to be told that he would have to choose a king after hearing all of the horrible things that the Owl King did. And a page and a half kind of like detailing what he had done when Anki and Shiryu come there after he brings him back from Japan. There's just like nothing left, like all of their homes have been burned down. People are trying to find like places to hide, like they're all trying to like huddle under the white trees that the people are born from, because demons never attack anyone who's staying under the white trees, and there's just like nothing growing there or anything. And so, like I said, he's pretty understandably wary of kings, and like Anki throughout the book, he doesn't seem to like Suryu that much. I mean, sort of he does, because he kind of sees some of the stuff he's done, but he is pretty wary. Like he always seems convinced that he's going to be going like bad soon, and it's not until like towards the end that he actually starts to like him more and actually kind of like enjoy being around him and understand that he's actually like a good person and a good king. And there's Koya, who I mentioned. He's he's so kind of similar to Anki, where like I said, he was abandoned as a child, and he ended up being found by Atsuyu, who's the governor of Gan, starting this whole rebellion. And Koya, he was found by him as a child. I don't think it was long after he'd met Anki, where he ended up kind of like stumbling on the camp while trying to find food, and so Atsuyu ends up taking him in and like taking care of him, like raising him at the castle with Rokuto there too. And like Koya throughout the book doesn't want to see anything wrong with Atsuyu. Like he spends so much of the book like defending him, like kind of like the opposite of Anki, where like Anki sort of defends Shiryu, but then he also doesn't, where Koya just won't hear anything bad about Atsuyu, which also makes sense because him and Big One were always run out of towns. Like nobody wanted to be around him. Like people kept chasing him away and like shooting arrows at him. Like he met Atsuyu after like villagers shot at him with arrows and ended up getting sick from this. I can understand him like idolizing Atsuyu so much that he doesn't see the bad in him, because it starts to be revealed like who Atsuyu is as a person, that it takes Koya like the whole book to like realize how terrible of a person he is. But like it had taken like 20 years for this to happen, and like I think he vaguely knew, but he didn't want to like come to terms with who he is as a person, because he was just so lonely and wanted like people to be around. And now he has a family for the most part and a place to like belong. But like all he wanted was a place to belong. Yeah, and actually it is like pretty sad that the first man who like tries to help him is a pretty terrible person. Like it's like what would have happened if like Suryu found him instead? Because like I said, it wasn't long after like Suryu came to the throne that Anki ends up meeting like Koya. I think it was only like 2 years, and then they meet back up again like 18 years after this. And Koya spends so much like trying to justify everything that Atsuyu does that, like I said, it's down to the end that he realizes kind of like everything, and that he's not the man that he thinks he is. So I think like slowly throughout the book, after meeting like Anki and like talking with like Ribi and all of these other people, I think he's slowly starting to realize it. Like I said, he also understands that there are things that Atsuyu like gets him to do that would like reflect badly on Koya, not him. Like at one point he talks about how Atsuyu is talking about how like people don't understand him and how people are like turning against him. But he doesn't say anything about like executing them or anything like that. But Koya understands that that is what he wanted, and he ends up like talking to him about this, and Atsuyu's like, no, I don't want that, but he's like secretly like telling Koya in no uncertain terms that this is what he wanted. Like really. But because he's like openly telling him not to, Etsu is able to like tell people that he was like telling Koya that that's not what he wanted, so only like Koya gets in trouble, but Koya understands that this is what he actually wanted, but it's like he doesn't understand almost how badly this could turn out, and that Atsuyu doesn't care if he gets in trouble, and that this is like what he wanted anyway, for Koya to take off the blame while he walks away like scot-free. And then one of the other characters is Soryu, like obviously, like he's the king of An. He's like kind of like Anki. He's like pretty similar to how he acts like nowadays that we've seen him, of being like pretty like carefree, like leaving the castle a lot to like go into town, have like different names, and just kind of like doing stuff. Or like the book opens with him being brought back to the castle after he gambled away his money, was about to like walk off his debt to, I think it was like the innkeeper or something, or like somewhere he was about to like start like sweeping. But also he's like pretty serious and like understands his duties as king, where he like basically knows what he's doing and how to do it, and like understands what people are going to do in response, where like he knows what Atsuyu's going to do in response to what he's doing, and then he's also able to make response to what Atsuyu is going to do in response to what he did originally. Like I said, he was also born in Japan. He was born into like a noble family who used to be like generations ago like pirates, but they end up getting, I think it was like the favor of the emperor at the time, and became like noblemen. Like he was basically raised to be a lord, like before he was going to become king. Like that's also why he's like pretty good at doing his job as king. Like he was like basically raised to do it, even back in Japan he was doing the same stuff he always did. Like he's a pretty friendly guy. He always spent time with like the people in the castle and in town and everything. And so like when he comes to and to be the king, he like he has to like learn how everything's done there, but he has like an understanding of how to run stuff. So that's not like a huge like whiplash with like Yoko, who was just like teenage girl in high school basically, who when she became queen she had to learn both like how to rule government and about the world at the same time. And also like later on where one of the flashbacks we feel that Anki had saved him after like one of his family's like enemies came after them, and Anki ends up telling him that he's the king of another country in a different world and that he's there to like bring him back. And then there's another flashback of him showing Shiryu like what Anne is like the on one of like the mountains in Anne, like showing him how much of a wasteland Anne has become. He's like, do you still want this? And he's like, yeah, it's gotta take a bunch of work, but I'm up for doing this. And like he's like pretty calm about the fact that this kid like took him to another world and told him he's like kin now and that he's basically immortal, and he seems like pretty fine with this. And he also like doesn't really seem to care that much about what people say about him. Like I think he does to an extent, but like he never really gets mad at them for calling him names or for calling him out on stuff or like being mad at him. Like he just seems to take it in strides, I think. And like he doesn't seem to be that mad over like Anki getting mad at him for doing stuff. Because I think he understands like why Anki's acting the way he does towards like the kings and everything. He also has like a pretty good understanding of how the people will react when they learn that another like rebellion's going to happen, and that there's a chance that they would lose the king again after everything that's happened with the Owl King, and how Shiryu has finally managed to get like the kingdom going on like the right path and everything. So I do like the fact that Shiryu is a lot smarter than people like give him credit for, because like throughout the book people talk about how he's like an idiot and that he never does his job, but then we often see him doing stuff that at the moment seems really weird and like it doesn't make sense, but then you find out he has this whole plan that he doesn't tell that many people about, or that he'll like tell him why he's doing that stuff, and they seem surprised that he's like able to do this stuff. And then there's also Atsuyu who is the son of the previous lord of the Gen province. Like he ended up taking over because he said that his father is sick and isn't able to like rule, so they have him like locked away in the castle, and he's acting as like the head of Gan province, even though like that position I think they say is supposed to be appointed by the king. Like he just can't like take over that spot. It's like because like the ministers are appointed by the king, I think they were saying. And so for like most of the book, Atsuyu is presented as being like someone who really cares about the people and wants to help them, because they mentioned several times at the beginning that the rainy seasons are going to be coming to end soon. There's one river running through Anne called the Clearwater that I think it's the one like it's like really bad, and like all of like the levees on like the edge of the river were damaged during the previous king. There was so much damage in Anne that they weren't able to like really get to them yet because they had to like start from the ground up. And so it seems like Etsu wants to pressure the king to get the levees built along the Clearwater because it runs straight through Gan province. But then you find out that he actually wants to be risen to a spot over the other king. I forget what they called it, but he wants to basically rule Anne without having the punishment of the gods, because like they mentioned several times that like the kings have to have like the set of rules of how to rule the government and how to rule like the country that was given to them by the gods. And if they stray from the path, then the Kirin starts to suffer from like Sitsudo, which would cause them to get sick, and this would start bringing in like disease, famine, storms, demons, unless the king starts to get on the correct path again. And so he ends up wanting to like sidestep all of that, where he was still being immortal, he can rule and forever, but he won't be punished for any of the stuff that he does, and so like Anne doesn't have to be punished for it. So he was saying it if like the gods really wanted the kings to rule and have like these set of rules saying that they have to live by, then why do they keep giving like signs to the Kirin to pick people who will eventually like lose the path and like destroy the kingdom? So he's trying to present it as a way to like protect the people, saying that he'll never lose the path and like allow things to be destroyed, but he really just wants all the power. Because it is revealed that like he doesn't like it when people question him. He like punishes everyone for his own failures. His father tells a story of how at one point he ended up having a servant punished because he had failed, because Tsuyu ended up missing like the bullseye in an archery competition. I think it was for like school or something, where he ends up, like I said, missing the target, and he blamed the servant for putting that target weirdly, and that he did it to like sabotage him because the competition was supposed to like symbolize like stomping out evil or something. At the end, he starts getting mad that like everybody failed him, even though he was also making decisions that like caused this. And like his father, who is revealed to actually be well and being kept in the dungeon, and like there's someone else being like kept to like impersonate him. Like his father like reveals to Anki that he never went on Hosan to be chosen as king or see if he was worthy, because he couldn't stand the idea that he wasn't worthy to be king. And so he just never went, even though he seemed to have wanted to become king anyway. And like he is pretty good at trying to get people on his side. Well, he's like convinced everybody, or like most people in the Gen province, that he's a good man. He's trying to do what they want. And like even when he like took over Gen province from his father, he tried to make it seem like he was doing it for the people, because his father had been so like afraid of what the Owl King would do that he just went along with what he was doing because he didn't want to be punished or killed. But he never actually tried to go against him to try and protect people, and Atsuyu used like that as the basis for overthrowing him, saying that he'll protect the people from all of these other people who are just going to like hurt and punish them. Like I also like the contrast between him and Suryu, where like they're both pretty smart people, but their images are like really like flipped, where so many people view Suryu as like an idiot who can't do his job, who just keeps like running away from Konki, which is the capital of Anne, just to like do stuff in town, and like he never goes to like court meetings, like his ministers can never find him, and so people just seem to assume that something bad is gonna happen because he's not doing his job, where he actually is like a pretty intelligent person who knows exactly what he's doing and ends up gathering a whole bunch of information in the town to use in his plans. And he actually cares a lot about what's going to happen to like everyone. Where Tsuyu pretends to be a good person who's doing everything he can and like building up the town and the cities in the Gan province, but he's not really doing it for the people. He just wants to do it for himself. So I do kind of like enjoy like the parallels between like Koya and Tsuyu and like Anki and Suryu. But they're all like kind of similar, but then you get some of the other characters like Ribi, who I think I mentioned, where she was sent to Gen to be like watch over it, I think it was, or to kind of like act as the governor until they can get someone there like permanently, I think it was. And she goes missing. She's like pretty loyal to the King of Anne and like strongly believes in the Mandate of Heaven. But well, like I think she doesn't appear that much, but she's like pretty like decent, I thought. Like she only appears for like a couple of like pages really. Where she's being held prisoner with Anki, who ended up being kidnapped by Koya, and to be used as like a hostage against Suryu. And so they were put in the same cell with with this red thread with a stone that's like rubbed around their forehead, that where if one breaks, then the other one kills the other person. And Ribi ends up breaking the thread that's wrapped around Anki, which ends up killing her, where she wants to try and do that and to try and like free Anki. And so like I sort of like Ribi. I wish he had appeared a bit more. Like we kind of see, like I said, see how dedicated she is to Suryu, and at one point she and Tsuyu are talking, Anki's in the same room, and they get into like this argument over the Mandate of Heaven and what the throne like means, what the king means, and should we have a king and everything like this. Where she gets so mad that she's about to like punch at Tsuyu, but Anki ends up convincing her not to, because like Kieran don't like violence or anything. Why I feel like if Anki hadn't been in the room, she would have like straight up punched him in the face. Well, like you don't know that much about her. Like you learn she had a family before this, and they never like ascended to like the Divine Registry with her. And so as she stayed the same age, they didn't. And like I don't think she knows really like what happened to them, except they're probably have already passed away by now. I kind of wish we got to know more a bit about her before she sacrificed herself, because it feels like she just appeared, has like I don't know, like 2 scenes with Anki, and then she's gone. Like I think they mentioned her. Like I say, do think they mentioned her like once after this, where back at the palace, I think they mentioned her, but I don't think they talk about her either in like the little time skip that happens after this. That's like 10 years. And so there's really only like like 3 other characters, if any, important. There was Suko, Itan, Seisu, and Suikyo, who are like his closest ministers and like the only people in the court he trusts after he ascended the throne, because a lot of the other ministers used to serve the Our King and had become pretty corrupted during his reign, and he can't really like trust them. And so like all these people were people who like spoke out against him, but in such a way that like impressed him and that he found funny, so he ended up making them like part of the code and like raising their ranks and everything. And like they get some personality and like a little bit of backstory. Like it's at least more than like book 4 with like Yoko, where like she only had one minister we talked about, which was like Seikyo, who was like the High Mandarin who like ruled over all of the other ministers. But even then, he only really appeared for like one scene that where he set up for like 2 paragraphs to talk to Yoko about something, and then he like disappears. I think he gets mentioned a few times, and she had like no one else in her court that were talked about at all. Like they didn't even get names or like personalities. So I kind of like at least in this one, he has like more ministers who are named that he talked to. So it feels a bit more like the court is alive a little bit. That's also the same thing with like Taiki and Gyosho. Like when they get into N, they talk about how I think it's like the ministers have talked about like stuff changing so much and everything, and like talking to them about it, but we never meet them or anything. So I kind of, at least like with like these guys, they seem to be trying to do stuff and like interacting with like Soryu and Anki, and like their interactions are actually like kind of funny. And then at Tsuyu, he has like he really only has like Koya and the one guy working for him that we see who are like really like talked about a lot. And so like the plot of this book, like I said, it's Etsuyu wanting to take like a position higher than the other king to continue rule and not be worried about like being punished. But I felt like the plot of it went by pretty quickly. Like it's the same thing with like Taiki, where I felt like a bunch of stuff happened, but a lot of it happened kind of like off screen. Well, these with like book 4, a bunch of stuff happened, and there was stuff that happened off screen, but I felt like there was a bunch of stuff happening on screen as well that I didn't mind it. But this one is like barely 300 pages. Like it's just Psy, but like it's 294. And so I kind of wish that it was like a bit longer, along with like book 2. Because I felt like there were a bunch of scenes that could have been added, like Shiryu going into town and learning all of this stuff. Because at one point he ends up joining like Etsuryu's army by accident, almost. And also it is pretty funny that like Shiryu can just go into town and like infiltrate this army and like nobody realizes that he's the king. It's like the same thing with like Yoko in book 4, where she's able to like leave the mountain and just walk across like her country to like several towns. Like nobody realizes that she's the queen, especially because she has very distinctive red hair. Like a lot of people mentioned like her red hair throughout the books. Like in book 1, she ended up having to like dye her hair like a darker color, like black or something, when she's in the 12th Kingdom to try and like hide herself. Because at that point she was being like hunted down by like King of Ko. But then in book 4, she's called, I think it was Sakushi, or like the Red Child, where she's like famous for having like this bright red hair, and like several people, when she meets up with them, like they remember her because of her hair, and it's just like nobody realizes this. And it's the same thing with like Suryu. Like he joined this army and presumably been like a couple of weeks, I think, and yet nobody picked up on the fact that he's the king. And like he even went to the Etsuyu's temple, like went there, walked around. Well, like the only person to recognize him was the one general who had gone to Konkyu to talk to Suryu about what Etsuyu like really wanted, the Haku Taku. His name is spelled Hakutaku. Well, like he's the only one to recognize Suryu as being the king. After he's like scanning the crowd when Etsuyu's plan failed, and he like spots him in the crowd, and he's like, "Oh, it's you," and Soryu like steps forward and like reveals himself. Well, like even when he like in the crowd, no one in the crowd knew him. It's actually fine, like I said, funny and like pretty impressive that he's able to do all of this stuff, and nobody knows who he is. Yeah, the book basically ends with Soryu infiltrating the castle, like saving Anki, and then he like confronts Atsuyu in like the main like part of the castle, like a courtroom, I think it's supposed to be, and he tells him that he's lost, that he's like basically being put under arrest, but Atsuyu tries to like attack him, and he ends up summoning one of the Sirei, Rikaku, to try and protect Soryu when Atsuyu tries to attack him from behind. And he ends up being like badly injured, like in the neck, but because he's immortal, it doesn't kill him right away, and so Soryu ends up having to like put him out of his misery basically, and that's basically, like I said, how the book ends. Like the end of the book also felt like pretty rushed too. Like the whole like rebellion plot line, even if it was supposed to be faked, felt like super rushed. Like I said, a lot of it happened like off screen, where I mean, it seems like both sides are trying to like prevent anything like bad happening, like big battles or anything. So I can kind of understand that, but at the same time, like book 2, I just wanted like more stuff happening. So like the last few pages of the book, it's like feels so like rushed, where Koya tries to find some sort of like punishment from Soryu for what he had done, but Soryu doesn't punish him, like telling him that he'll make a place where humans and demons can live in peace with each other, so that Koya and Rokuta aren't discriminated against. And he eventually does at some point put demons on the like the Mount Registry, that they call it. Well, it's horse, ox, fae, beast, and now they added demons. And so he was trying to keep to his promise to Koya that he'll make a peaceful nation. And so, but Koya doesn't believe him and tells him when that happens, he'll come back. And so Koya starts to wander the world. Like after this, no one mentions like what happened to him. Like no one talks about him. Like in the other books, which is kind of understandable because this book takes place so long in the past, and that most of the people who would have known who he is either maybe forgot about him or are gone, and really like the only people who like would remember him like very strongly would probably be like Anki and Soryu. But yeah, but like the other books, like I said, I don't mention him, but there is a difference in the anime. Like I want to talk about it. Like at some point I want to talk about like the differences between the anime and the book series, because I did kind of talk about that with book 1, with like the King of Ko, and appearing a lot more in the anime than the book. Just like they did include stuff in the anime that where it's like sort of, unless you've read the other books or like know about them, it's like they include stuff in the anime that show up in the later books but don't appear in the English translated ones that were published. And so they sort of spoil some of the stuff that the characters learn later on. But yeah, like I said, after this, Koya doesn't appear again. Like, at least in the books, like I said, no one really talks about him, or like bring up the fact that there's a guy riding like a big demon, like roaming around the 12 kingdoms. And like, really, I doubt like anybody outside of Anne would talk about like Atsuyu, or like would even know about who he is. So like even though it took place like 500 years ago, they probably like learn about him in like school or something. I'm assuming. And like the biggest like what moment came for me was like I said earlier, Anki ends up finding Atsuyu's dad like locked in the dungeon and finds this other man who they convinced to pretend to be his father, but in reality he's also being kept locked in like the dungeons, but had his tongue removed so that he couldn't tell anybody what Atsuyu had done. And so he meets both of them, and he promises to get them freed, but by the end of the book, it's not mentioned what happened to them. Like, they don't say anything about his father being, like, put back as, like, the governor of Gan, or being stripped of his position and being sent somewhere else. They don't mention what happened to the man Etsuyu had hired then, mutilated to pretend to be his father. Like, they don't mention if he got free or like where he's living or what happened to him. So it's just so weird that they brought up these two characters, but they don't reveal like what happened to them. Like I'm assuming they got free, that Anki told like Suryu what happened and they went to go find them, but they never mentioned that in the book. It's where Atsuyu dies and then Koya leaves when all this happens, and so you try to promise him like a kingdom for him and Wokata, and then it cuts to like another flashback, which like the final one where Anki had saved Soryu after the one big battle against the Borokami clan who came to attack them. He's like the only one he could save, and he tells him he'll give him a kingdom. And then it cuts like 10 years later, and they talk about how they hired new ministers, and that Anki's trying to find Shoryu because he'd run off again. And then the book just kind of ends. Like I said, I'm assuming they're free, but their fates out like unknown. Yeah, so I think I thought this was like a good book, but also like one of the big problems I had was like, especially with like Anki's pouts, I think like once he gets captured by Koya and Atsuyu, it just seemed like he had endless conversations with people about the will of the heavens, the heavenly mandate, like the role of kings, that like why would the Emperor of Heaven choose kings who would eventually lay ruin to the kingdoms, especially all of these other conversations. Not that they were bad or anything. I thought they were like pretty interesting, but it just seemed like they kept happening like one after the other. Like they started like as soon as he got to the castle, he had one with Atsuyu, and then Ribi joined in, and then Atsuyu left, and he had one with Ribi like right after that, and then like right after that he had another one with like Koya. So it just kind of seemed for a bit, it just, like I said, like back to back conversations about this stuff, and it was kind of cool seeing like a kingdom so far in the past, because like most of the time we've seen stuff where it's like modern. I'm okay to call this stuff like yoga, like the modern storyline. Like the furthest back they went was with Suzu, and that was like 100 years, but it was only like briefly stuff with her. And then what? Because like she was also living in Japan like 100 years ago, and they were matching that stuff like I think with stuff like trains and like street lamps were like just being common in cities and stuff in Japan. Like I think that was like the 1900s or so. And then it cut back to Soge, where she was where like her part was like briefly like 30 years in the past, but that was only for like 2 pages. And so like this is like the only book that I've read. I think one of the books took place like 90 years earlier, but this is like so far back. It is pretty interesting a bit. And so I think this is like one of the ones where like you really don't have to. I mean, like I said, I did like it, but it's like you almost don't have to read this one for the most part to understand like any of the other books. Like with the three I have and a bit of what I know of the later books, I feel like you have to read those to understand some of the later books a bit. This one feels way more of like a standalone than the other ones. Like with like book 4, you sort of have to read book 1. I mean, like they do summarize what happened during book 1, so I feel like you can kind of understand what's going on. And then we also get a bit of like Japan like 500 years in the past, like it was in like, and then getting also a bit with like the previous like King of Anne before Suryu. So yeah, I think that was all like pretty interesting. Like I said, like my main complaint is that I wish that this was a lot longer, because I think there's a lot of stuff going on in this book that I think could stretch out a lot more. With like book 2 as well, like they could have at least been like 50 pages longer, and I would have been fine with that. Like they don't have to be as long as like book 4, because like book 4 is 650 pages long, and there's like a whole bunch of stuff going on in this one. And book 2 as well was 317. So like this one's a little bit longer, but like I said, I mean, I think for the length it's fine. Like it told the story fine, but like I thought that like the pacing was pretty good. Like I did like the characters, and yeah, I think that's everything for now. Peace.